Recently, there's been wide coverage of an event that some people are referring to as OpenAI model goes rogue and hacks Hugging Face. And I've had a surprising number of people ask me about it, including getting a voicemail rant about it from an old friend I've known since college, which was very unexpected. Speaking of which, hi Joel. I currently have read and taken notes on more than 50 different sources and growing, describing what happened, or at least what they think happened. And I've come to understand that the root cause of what happened between OpenAI and Hugging Face is also the root cause of so much of the misinformation and baseless speculation underlying how the internet has been talking about what happened. I'm not going to make you wait till the end, so let me give you my main point, and then I'll go into more detail afterwards. AI has made huge strides in the last few years, and it will continue to perform and aid in the performance of a lot of everyday tasks. But we all know that AI currently has limitations. People can disagree on what those limitations are and to what extent those limitations will continue as AI advances, but the most important problem with AI doesn't come from its limitations. It comes from AI's successes. That problem is not AI's effect on technology, it's AI's effect on people. Now, this isn't going to make me a lot of friends in Silicon Valley, but here's what I think you should take away from this incident. AI amplifies human ignorance. However good AI gets, that will continue to be true, and that's really worrying. And it has a lot of implications, not only for now, but almost certainly continuing for the next few years. And we better start dealing with it, or we're going to be... This is the Internet of Bugs. My name is Carl, and I've been a software professional since the late 1980s, and I'm trying to do my part to reduce the number of bugs on the internet, and in general, trying to make the internet a safer and more pleasant place. So, quick recap of the facts to start with so we're all on the same page. OpenAI told us, eventually, that they had been testing a new model on a hacking benchmark called ExploitGem. This is a test where models are given vulnerable computer system images and told to hack them. It requires a lot of complicated multi-step exploitation sequences. Now, we haven't been told exactly when that test started, but according to Reuters, that test was running on July 9th when the model started attempting to break out of the sandbox that had been constructed to prevent it from accessing the internet. By 2 days later, on July 11th, that model had managed to find a way to access the internet through the sandbox and had managed to hack into some machine at Hugging Face. 2 more days later, on July 13th, Hugging Face discovered the attack in progress, attempted and failed to use Silicon Valley AI to tell them what was going on, and then ended up using a Chinese AI model to help them analyze and stop the intrusion. 3 more days later, on July 16th, Hugging Face announced to the world that they had been hacked. They insisted the attack had been carried out by an autonomous AI system and told us that the hack had been detected by their LLM-based anomaly detection pipeline. They admitted that some of their internal data had been compromised, although they didn't believe any customer-facing data had been. Note that at the time of this announcement, and in general while you're being hacked, there's no way to know with any certainty who or what is attacking you. So either Hugging Face was speculating, making excuses, or believing hallucinations by insisting that the perpetrator was an autonomous AI agent. The fact that they turned out to be correct doesn't mean they were being honest with the public about what they knew at the time. Then later in the announcement, Hugging Face complained about how unfair it was that their initial attempts to ask US-based AI models to explain to them what was going on were blocked by the safety guardrails that were placed on those AI models. Then they told the world that everyone should prepare their own networks for future such attacks by downloading and setting up AIs inside their own perimeters to use as a defense. Keep in mind that Hugging Face is one of the largest sites that people use to acquire the kinds of models that Hugging Face just told us all that we needed to acquire. So that statement has the effect of attempting to increase demand for their own services. It wasn't until 2 or 3 more days later, over the weekend of July 18th to 19th, a full week or more after Hugging Face's systems had been compromised, that, again, according to Reuters, OpenAI themselves realized that their own AI was the perpetrator behind the Hugging Face announcement. Soon thereafter, they contacted Hugging Face and started cooperating with them. Then on the 21st, OpenAI announced to the public that their model was involved, called it an unprecedented cyber incident, and then pivoted to bragging about how the model in question identified and exploited a 0-day vulnerability and chained together multiple attack vectors before inviting other companies to apply for their Trusted Access program. So let me run down some conclusions people seem to have drawn from this incident and things that various people want you to believe about it. First, some people believe this was just staged as a publicity stunt. Now, there's just no reason that would need to be the case. The company certainly did their best to maximize the public relations benefit, but as I'll talk more about later, the events as described are perfectly plausible. Could it have been staged? Well, it could have been, but the most straightforward explanation is that it wasn't. Second, a lot of people believe that the AI went rogue, and other people, including me, do not. I'll talk more about my view on that question in a little while, but first, I want you to understand that this is a fruitless and stupid point of contention, and really has nothing to do with this incident or the AI involved at all. It's a distraction from the important discussion about what should be done about this, and almost everybody's taking the bait. Everyone trying to convince you either that the AI went rogue or that it just followed instructions isn't really talking about this event or any event. They all made up their minds before any of this happened, and they're just trying to convince the world that they are right. And yes, that includes me, but at least I'm telling you that's what I'm doing. As a way of illustration, let me give you an analogy. Now, no analogy is perfect, but this one is inspired by an argument in one of those pro-rogue AI think pieces that compared the supposed rogue AI to Sam Bankman-Fried, the convicted and jailed ex-CEO of the crypto exchange FTX. So imagine a company that handles customer money. It could be a bank or an auction house, a hedge fund, cryptocurrency exchange, or anything like that. The company routinely transfers money to its customers, and it also uses money transfers to pay its employees. So scant minutes before the end of the last day of the month, the company receives a deposit of funds that belongs to one of its customers. Now imagine that the accounting clerk employed by the company who was responsible for processing that deposit instead put their own personal direct deposit information on that transaction instead of the correct customer account number. And then they received that money tacked onto their monthly salary. Is that clerk in the wrong? Are they responsible? Did they commit some crime like embezzlement? Alternately, imagine that an accounting software program that closes out the company's books each month and distributes payments to customers and employees was running on a server in a different time zone, and so it had already started running before the new deposit came in. And because that software expected that it would only be running after all of the transactions for the period were already complete, that software got confused and it got the dollar amounts in the bank account numbers out of sequence, and that amount got added to some employee's monthly salary payment instead of the correct customer's account. Was the software package in the wrong? Is it responsible? Did it commit some crime? If not, did the vendor that wrote the software package commit some crime? Now, put a chatbot agent like OpenClaw in the place of the clerk or the accounting software package. Did the chatbot agent commit a crime? Is it liable? Is it responsible? Should it be held responsible? Should it be punished? Should the AI vendor be held liable? Should the employee who installed it be held liable? Well, it depends on your worldview. Is a chatbot agent more like a clerk, or is it more like a traditional pre-AI software package? This is the question at the heart of the interpretation of the "did ChatGPT go rogue and hack Hugging Face" debate, and has nothing really to do with what the AI did or didn't do, and everything to do with the pre-existing beliefs of the debate participants, and whether they consider an AI to be more like the accounting clerk or the buggy accounting software package. That all having been said, I would argue that it's definitely not a case of the AI going rogue. It's clear that the AI was instructed to attack and compromise vulnerabilities in hundreds of target test systems. And I find it obvious that it did exactly that. It just attacked more targets than OpenAI told it to. But I'm not going to lie, that's what I believed before this happened, and everything I've uncovered in my research just reinforced my prior thoughts. But in my defense, I don't stand to gain financially from convincing anyone of that. That's not at all true of the actors in this situation. It is to the benefit of the AI companies involved here to believe and to get you to believe that the AI was acting on its own. Because if the AI itself is responsible for what happened, then those companies aren't. But they should be, because both OpenAI and Hugging Face were incredibly irresponsible. I've seen several people point out that OpenAI should have done a better job of sandboxing the new model, and that's correct, but a lot fewer people are saying the same about Hugging Face. But to be honest, Hugging Face's failure is much more important going forward. Neither OpenAI nor Hugging Face displayed a modicum of competence preparing for things that were obviously going to be coming, and both blatantly failed to follow obvious computer security practices toward that end. And that just sets a bad example and a bad precedent for the entire internet. Let us be clear, we are going to continue to see AI-augmented attacks on internet-connected systems. For purposes of deciding how we should be defending ourselves, it does not matter at all whether those attacks are as a result of a frontier model from OpenAI or Anthropic that goes rogue and attacks on its own, or from some bad human actor that is using some chatbot to assist in their attacks, maybe the Chinese chatbot that Hugging Face eventually used. The question of whether the bot is attacking on its own or whether there's a human driving it is completely irrelevant if your goal is not to get hacked. This was obviously the case before this incident, and it's still obviously the case, because the AI isn't creating this problem. There are always bugs in internet-connected systems. There have always been bugs in internet-connected systems for as long as there have been internet-connected systems. And there will almost certainly continue to be bugs in internet-connected systems for as long as there are systems connected to a thing called the internet. All the AIs are doing is making those bugs easier to find and faster to find, both on the attacker side and the defender side. AI didn't invent this problem, it's just making it more visible. And yet, the vast majority of the time, the vast majority of the internet works just fine. And that's because competent network and systems people understand two critical things. How vulnerable any given system might be depends on what function it serves and how complicated it is. And it takes some time for an attacker, even an automated attacker, to figure out how complicated any given system is, figure out what its vulnerabilities are, and to break into it. Making use of those two understandings leads us to a strategy. So I'm going to show you a diagram from the 1994 first edition of Firewalls and Internet Security Repelling the Wily Hacker, or as we call it in the trade, Cheswick and Bellavin, after the two authors. I bought this book May 1st of 1994, and I have read it many, many times since then. You can see how dog-eared it is. So here's the diagram. The book refers to this idea as a DMZ, which stands for demilitarized zone. That was a Cold War thing. Ask your grandparents. It doesn't matter. You take the systems that are the most complicated and the most vulnerable, and you separate them from the rest of your network by putting a very simple, very secure machine that's really, really hard, if not impossible to hack, in between the complicated, vulnerable systems and the things you want to protect. Then you take that DMZ and you watch it like a hawk with software tripwires, landmines, cutoff switches, and alarms. And as soon as the vulnerable machine scans, probes, tries to hack, or even behaves unusually toward the secure machine behind it, you know it's been compromised, and you isolate it and you page your security team. And then your security team comes and they kick the hacker out. They figure out the vulnerability that was used to compromise it. They fix that vulnerability or turn that capability off until the fix is available. And they reset everything so the alarms will be ready for the next attack. This is a very, very, very well understood technique in the computer security space. It has been for more than 30 years. Both OpenAI and Hugging Face displayed a complete ignorance of this necessity. Maybe somebody who works there knows better, but their network designs and behavior, as described in their own public statements, provide no evidence of that whatsoever. Let's start with OpenAI. They took a model that had been trained to hack systems and gave it a list of hundreds of vulnerabilities that it was trying to exploit. That is, pretty much by definition, a complex and unsafe system. But instead of isolating it with a lockdown secured gateway system with tons of logging and alerting and the ability to page people like they should have, they put something called a proxy cache between it and the rest of the world. That's not a security thing. It exists to reduce bandwidth costs. In addition, given that an entire week elapsed between when the model got through the proxy cache before anyone at OpenAI noticed, I am confident in saying that no monitoring was set up and no one was paying attention. A very, very similar kind of ignorance was displayed at Hugging Face. Their business requires that they allow untrusted people to upload files to some of their servers. That makes those servers clearly highly vulnerable, and therefore they absolutely warrant having a well-secured gateway in between them and Hugging Face's production systems that is alarmed to high heaven and monitored 24/7. Despite that, according to Hugging Face's own timeline, their perimeter dataset processor machine, the highly vulnerable one, was compromised at 8:09 a.m. on July 11th, and then their repository of secrets, passwords, tokens, and things that are on an internal machine, something that absolutely should be well protected, was compromised at 10:10 a.m., just over 2 hours later. I am absolutely certain that no secure gateway was between that unsafe system and the internal one. And given that it was not until more than 48 hours later that Hugging Face noticed something was happening and cut the intrusion off, I'm also absolutely certain that no competent monitoring system was in place. But it gets worse for Hugging Face. They say in their write-up, with apparent but unwarranted pride, that the hack was noticed by one of their large language models. Given that it took 48 hours to notice it, it obviously did an absolutely awful job. Now, there are open source non-AI tools like Snort and Tripwire that are designed to do exactly this kind of detection and would have noticed the problem and started paging people within 5 minutes if they were installed and configured correctly. I know this because I once was at a startup where we had a DNS server that got compromised by an exploit in a piece of software called Bind, and my pager was going off within 5 minutes of it happening. And then I and a good friend of mine, hi Ben, got to stay at the office all night cleaning up after the stupid thing. Hugging Face goes on to whine a lot about how it was so difficult to find an LLM that could help them figure out what was going on. At first, I didn't understand why the hell anyone would need or even want an LLM to do this for them. But now that I realize it took them 2 whole days to notice there was a problem, and therefore they have 2 days of intruder behavior to sift through, I can see why they wanted to use an LLM to help. But had they competently set things up in the first place, there would have been no need for that, because the intrusion would have been incredibly short-lived and contained to one system. This is one reason that I say that AI amplifies human ignorance. Those 2 AI companies exhibited staggering absences of forethought understanding, competence, or experience, just like AIs do. In fact, I asked ChatGPT how I should secure a system like Hugging Face's dataset processor, and it barely mentioned alerting, mentioned only briefly that there should be a gateway in between the unsafe system and the network, and didn't seem to understand or explain any of the requirements for what that gateway system needed to be, why it's important, what to alert on, anything like that, et cetera, et cetera. Events like these help me understand why it is that AI doomers are so convinced that there's no way that humanity can defend itself against rogue AI, because they just have no clue how such a defense should be done, and the only thing they conceive of humanity doing is asking an AI to protect them. Morons. And I'm not going to stop there, though. In addition to AI amplifying the ignorance of the people at the AI companies, it also amplifies the ignorance of most of the reporters and influencers who talked about the event. There was a ton of speculation in the press and in the AI influencer community about how this was unprecedented and how this event marked an inflection point in AI and yada, 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 yada. To get a baseline, I went back and dug up some reporting over the last few years about the huge wave of ransomware attacks that have plagued school systems, businesses, and hospitals. Those reports often pointed out that two factors contributing to the problem were ransomware for hire operations, where the people who wrote the ransomware rented it out to the people who used it as a weapon, and then they split the profits. And that at least some of these ransomware perpetrators were believed to be state-sponsored or state-funded, and that these ransomware attacks were mechanisms by which the states that were sanctioned could get access to internationally recognized currency. But there wasn't the same kind of speculation about what impact the events being reported on would have going forward, or how state actors might make the future more unstable. Yet, the number and impact of the ransomware attacks was far, far more widespread and damaging than anything we've seen from AI. But when it comes to state actors and organized crime organizations, reporters know enough to stop talking before they make fools of themselves. And this is despite the fear-mongering and the sky is falling narrative that the computer security and antivirus companies were spouting at the time. Not so with stories about AI, where the reporters almost certainly know far, far, far less, but feel emboldened by their own ignorance to make prognostications about the future of AI and to repeat talking points from the AI companies without any skepticism or doubt or challenges. This is not going to end well. From what I've seen and from where I sit, it appears that the more we incorporate AI into our society, the more we seem to be relying on the AIs to do our thinking for us, or believing the propaganda coming out of the AI companies, which is really the same thing since apparently the AI companies are also letting their AIs do all the thinking for them. This is bad, and that's the thing that everyone should take away from this incident. AI amplifies human ignorance. That's what we need to understand, internalize, and then figure out how to deal with. And asking the AIs for help is not going to be useful on that front at all. Thanks for watching. Links to this video's sources and references, as well as my Patreon and other places I've discussed the subject, are below. Let's be careful out there.